welcome to our interview with Brian Fargo about the upcoming role-playing game The Bard's Tale 4 and some anecdotes from the development of the original Bard's Tale game way back in the 1980s. This interview is an excerpt from episode 68 of the Spieleveteranen-Podcast, and as you probably can tell by this funny name and my equally funny accent, it's a German language podcast about gaming history, retro gaming, and current events. And we figured for an English-speaking audience who really doesn't want to sit through 90 minutes of a bunch of Germans talking, it would be nice just to have the pure interview. Here it is. We had chatted with Brian on May 20th, just as he was getting ready to launch the Kickstarter campaign for The Bard's Tale 4. Here we go. In a nutshell, what are the areas where you're really trying to stick close to the original trilogy in terms of spirit and feeling? And what are the main areas which really need to be modernized and will look and feel and play different?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's exactly how I approached it. So let's first talk about the things that I think are important that we keep from the originals and that I think that people really gravitated towards. I think one is certainly that it's a party-based game. It's not a single player, and I think they use the word blobber these days, but that you're moving through an environment and you should have as a group, but you're kind of representing the entire party as you're moving through. And then once combat starts, then that's a different thing, and I'll come back to that. And so I think that's part of it. I think that also it is a lot of the trappings that made the first game so great were the dungeons or the maps themselves. It was, people liked sort of narrowing it down kind of square by square. This was a teleporter, or this was a spinner, or there's a secret door exactly here, and here's a magic mouth, and so all the things that people could kind of, if they wanted to bust out their graph paper, which is why there was a lot of discussion about, whether we should be free roam or on a grid. And I kind of went along the lines of that we're going to, you can move on a grid and you can map it on a grid. And I think there's a precision to that kind of game that I quite enjoy myself versus just the kind of the completely open world. We're not trying to be an open world game. That's not what the Bard's Tale is, but there's no reason it can't look like it's an open world, visually speaking. Did you see the screenshot that I sent you by chance? Or that we put out?
Is the teaser screenshot the first one? Yes, I did.
Of the dungeon. So like that doesn't look like a typical grid-based dungeon. So you can move on the grid or you can snap off of it and you can move around more freely if you want. But ultimately, when combat starts, you're really going to kind of snap back onto the grid. And that's where the combat will take place. So I think, that the whole dungeon sort of philosophy and design is the same. The other thing is the puzzles and the riddles. That was a big part of the first game, that you had to really figure stuff out. And sort of specific to that, why it's here's a modification. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, but back then, if we gave you really a difficult puzzle to do and you couldn't solve it, you were just stuck. That would be it. Until you figured it out, you just hit against the wall. So where we need to update the thinking there is I still want to throw that kind of stuff at the player, but I think it's more reward-based, which is if you figure it out, you'll get some really great stuff. If you don't, you can just kind of move along and get something else. And obviously, the harder the puzzle, the bigger the payoff. And so I think that part of it's, the whole kind of party buffing. One of the things that made Bard so unique at the time, and of course it's been done a lot since then, is the Bard would play his lute and he would buff the party in different ways. So that's going to be a big part of it. And the other thing is that it was phase-based combat before, which was, if you'll remember, it was that, you would issue all of your parties, sort of on your side of the table, you'd issue your commands, you'd hit return, and then you'd watch what happens would all roll out. Well, I think we need to deviate from that a little bit, which is we're still going to be phase-based. But I think in this day and age, to execute all of your orders and hit return, so to speak, at the end and wait and watch what happens is a little overly passive and not necessary. So I think it needs to be more dynamic in nature. So we're basically like dynamic phase based, which is that when it's your turn, your party will go, but it'll go one by one by one. So, your wizard in slot 1 may cast a spell, and depending on what there could be a randomness to that spell, or there could be that the enemy responded in a way that you didn't expect. And so that when it goes to your rogue in slot 2, you may then change what you would have done otherwise based upon what happened previously. And then as you go number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. So it's more fluid, and you're more engaged in every step of the way. But once you've made all your moves, boom, then it flips over and it's the other side's turn. So we're going to keep the phase base, but make it a little bit more dynamic.
So are you going to switch from the exploration view to a dedicated combat screen, like the old Final Fantasy games, for example?
Well, not exactly. So you're going to be moving through. So here's the other part of it, which is, the kind of the whole immersive feeling of moving through a dungeon. I love that, right? But I think to relegate it to the upper left-hand corner of the screen in a small window, it's sort of unnecessary to do that with what you can do with UI and things these days. So that's why the screen you're saying it's full screen, and so and because of the nature of what it is, it's not multiplayer and it's not real time. That 40 enemies are running around. We have a lot of horsepower to really do something that's sort of visually super impressive and ambitious, which is what we're doing. And you've seen this one shot, but we have some other stuff we're going to show. I think people will be very impressed with. But so you're moving through the dungeon. Once combat starts, rather than cut away to a brand new scene like you suggest with Final Fantasy, it's more like the camera's going to kind of pull out and show you a broader view of the playfield. And then your characters will be, represented in right there on the scene. So it feels more like you're there as opposed to cutting away to some completely different thing. But it is a kind of a different mode, so to speak. Because when you're moving around, that's in real time, right? You're walking around the universe, but once combat starts, then it goes to phase based.
Right, because if combat would be real time, it really would be more like Dungeon Master as opposed to the Bard's Tale. So combat has to stay turn or phase based, doesn't it?
Right. No. Yeah, we don't. Yeah, that's exactly right. We don't want it to be. We want, again, the same cadence of the original. So yeah, combat has to now stop and then go to phase base like the original. It's just I'm kind of using the windowing and camera as opposed to having the screen broken up in discrete areas. Go ahead.
Just one thing, because you had mentioned one of the choice of the original was mapping out the dungeons and the paper maps. But on the other hand, there were a good number of people who bought the clue book because they hated doing the mapping, and I think even in Bard's Tale 3, the original trilogy started with early auto map concept. Yeah. So how much manual labor will a player have to do himself in the Bard's Tale 4? Are you putting an auto map?
No, there has to be an auto map. In this day and age, you can't force people to, bust out graph paper, but it's certainly going to be a mode. I mean, there are a hardcore group of people that do really like that, and so it's very easy for us to set some kind of iron mode or something to that effect. But absolutely, as you said, even the Bard's Tale started to have auto map features at the end. So they'll still be that. But one thing that we also like is the thing about the Bard's Tale series is they were pretty hard. They were challenging, and so we don't want to lose that. I love that. I mean, you have to really have your wits about you. And you look at the success of games like Demon Souls, and you see that if you're fair about the difficulty, and if they're learning a little bit, or if they're each time they die, or they blame themselves in some way, you can do a lot more. So we really want to make sure that we keep the difficulty. NPCs joining your party will all be part of it. We'll be we'll also be in the game. That was always fun. We'll dial up the personality that they'll have, the kind of the running commentary. You can have some trow in your party that's sort of constantly barking and reacting to the world, and rather than just sitting there lifeless. The other thing is that hitting on the puzzle part is also that the kind of the physical manipulation of the world will be sort of right there on the screen too. And one of the games that I use as a reference point that I really enjoyed is there's a game called The Room, which was a iOS game. It could be an Android also. It was just a puzzle-oriented game where you're opening up a chest within a chest within a chest and flipping switches and figuring things out. And it was very satisfying and very clever and very well done. And I really like that kind of approach to the physical manipulation, and that will drive down to the item level too, which is that if you're you could have an item, you could have a sword in your inventory, and you've been using it for hours, and you look at one point and you notice there's a little lever on it. You say, I didn't see that, and you flick it, and all of a sudden the sword lights up, starts glowing blue. Think, oh my gosh, I've had a magic sword the whole time. And so that sense of discovery, even at a very micro level.
Cool. I just have to ask one more question about the graphics. You mentioned that you were going for more like a high quality look and not a retro look. I guess that's also one of the reasons where you probably switched from Unity to what is it, Unreal Engine 4 now?
Yeah. There was. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, so the actual question is, sorry, I'm meandering. Is there something you discussed internally, what are the expectations of the player base? Because on one hand, like you said, the original games at the time were had high-end graphics, right? Color animations, which was in 85 was unusual for an RPG. But on the other hand, with those old franchises, isn't there a portion of the player base which kind of expects like a retro pixelated look? So how do you balance this need for being cutting edge with the visuals and also paying homage to the original look and feel?
Well, I guess our paying homage comes more in the form of gameplay style, in terms of managing a party and phase base and all the things that I had talked about. And also in paying homage to all the fiction of the universe, Mangar and Tarjan and the names of the spells and the monsters. And so that when you play it, you'll sort of immediately recognize the world and it will be speaking to you. If you played those other games, you'll understand it. I guess what we're really not trying to do is get the retro look of the old one. I think that's a sort of a different approach. When we did the original Bard cell, keep in mind the thing that we wanted to do to the category was, as you said, we wanted to bring music and graphics, animation, color to the category when it wasn't much being done with it at the time. So I'm kind of doing the same thing again. Hey, can you hold on one sec? My room service is getting here. Hold on just one moment.
Oh, no problem. You can.
Yeah.
You can take a break in a little bit. Sure.
Yeah, just 2 minutes.
Okay.
Come in. Let's set it right there. That'd be great. Sign this. Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Oh, I just hope your dinner is not getting cold.
No. Don't worry about it. It's okay. I got a little salad here. My salmon's under a hot plate, so don't worry about it. So anyway, so where were we at?
we were talking about the modern visuals and that back in the day.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So I guess I'm doing the same thing again, right? Which is bringing the visuals up to another level, but I think so long as it's not at a detriment to gameplay. If I'm doing something visually and changing the complete style or making it an action game or something like that, I could see where that would be an issue. But I love these games. I play them. It's probably my favorite category is kind of the classic dungeon crawl. So there's all these things that computers can do today, and it just seems it'd be a shame not to take advantage visually of what they can do. And you mentioned Unreal 4. I don't know if you saw the kite demo that they put out, but some of the stuff they're doing is really, really fantastic. You know, they have this level of detail routines where you get a sort of a 1,000,000 polygon tree. You could go all the way up to it, look at it from an inch away, and then pull back and get 10 square miles of it. You know, for wandering around, that's kind of exactly the kind of stuff we want.
So is there any timetable in place already? Do you have like a target year for the release of the fourth game, or does it really depend on the Kickstarter campaign and how much money you're going to make, how many stretch goals will have to be fulfilled?
It does. It depends on the budget. That's the most unusual thing about doing a game via crowdfunding is you don't know what your budget is going to be until you're well into it. So, but I mean, it's going to be a couple-year development cycle.
Right. I mean, one question that often comes up when we talk about Kickstarter and established game developers or studios going to Kickstarter. In your case, wouldn't you be able to just self-finance it? Because I think Wasteland 2 did pretty well, and what is the reason why you were asking for, what is it, the 1.25 on Kickstarter? And I think you're going to basically double whatever you're making from your own bank account, but why not just self-finance it and not have to worry with all the Kickstarter details?
Well, let's see, there's a couple answers to that question. Well, one is there's a benefit to crowdfunding that goes beyond just the money. And you know, it engages a group of people that are super passionate about what we do, and they get very involved, and they help spread the word. We don't spend marketing money. We don't have a marketing department or a marketing person. We rely on word of mouth, and and they help build that because they're, whether it's 40 or 50 or 60,000 people, and we're all behind it. If you do a good job, they really help spread the word. And I think the other part of it is that, with Kickstarter, I look at it that, I was explaining this before, there's this continuum of where you can get in on a game. You can get on a Kickstarter, and the benefit to getting on Kickstarter is that you're going to get the absolute best price, and there's a bunch of things that you're not going to be able to get later. Whether, we do special boxes that, if you're a collector, that's the only way you're going to get them, or if you want to have you or your spouse in the game, that's the only way you're going to get it. So there's some really unique things we can do up front that we can't do later on. So that's kind of step one. Step two is, well, I'll wait for, some people like early access. And there's people who they're either impatient, they want to play it right away, or they want to also be part of the process. And then step three is you'll just wait till it comes out. Step four is I'll wait till it comes out on sale. And step five is I'll wait till it comes in a bundle. And to me, we just sort of offer that whole continuum, and you can kind of jump in wherever you want. And I see no harm in allowing people to get in, earlier, especially in our case, which is, we deliver. So it's not like, there's always risk, of course, but at least we've proven we can deliver, above and beyond the Call of Duty. So I just see it as a net positive, no matter how you cut it.
Talking about numbers, I think the main reason why you are finally able to do a proper sequel to the original trilogy is that you were able to buy the intellectual property rights from Electronic Arts. So it kind of sounded like it was a long, painful, and expensive progress. Are there any behind the scenes things or numbers you were able to share?
It wasn't expensive. They were actually quite reasonable. I think it was just a function of enough time going by that we were doing we'd already been doing a Bard's Tale since 2005 without it, and so it just seemed like, come on guys, let's work out something that's fair. And so they were very reasonable about it. So it wasn't overly, they were not. It was not an expensive proposition. Right. I think sometimes it's enough time needs to go by.
And of course it's pretty important just for the lore and the story, because, I think one of the things that people appreciated about Wasteland 2 were all those story and characters that connected. So you didn't really have to know it, but if you knew it, it was an extra moment of joy. And now here you were really able to use the storyline and the Mad God and everything as a foundation for the sequel?
Right. Right. We'll be doing the same approach, which is that, like we're going to really reflect. You're going to be returning to Scarborough, and there'll be questions about, why are all these wizards headed to Scarborough? What is so important about Scarborough? And so we'll start answering kind of some of those mysteries. And while those guys are no longer alive, their cults live on, and so. So you'll be very much getting references that if you played the first games, left, right, and sideways, that, as you say, will give you a joy, a little smile on your face. And if you didn't play the games, it's fine. It's okay. You won't be missing out. You just won't, get the full appreciation for what's come before.
Speaking about the good old days, are there any anecdotes you remember, or what was the feeling back in '85? I guess the Bard's Tale was a big deal for you. Obviously, it was the breakthrough game for Interplay as a developer, but you had started out with a couple of pretty decent adventure games for Activision. And so just take us back a little bit. So when you think about, 1985, 30 years ago, what was your gut feeling about the product? What was going on in the office? And so on.
It really goes back to high school. I used to play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with Michael Cranford, and he was kind of the best dungeon master I knew. And he was a very bright guy, and he was a good artist, and so we were always pretty kind of close back in high school. And then I started Interplay, and he went off to Berkeley, started working for Hessware. And so he one day says, I want to move back to Southern California, and we should do something along the lines of wizardry, but let's dial it up. Let's kind of bring everything that that we loved about D&D, and also bring color and music and sound, and that's where the Bard's Tale was born. It was really from me and my my buddy. And in fact, his parents didn't buy him a computer, so he used to borrow my computer on the weekends, and he'd program it, and then he'd not Bard's Tale, but he'd learn to program, and then he'd return the computer during the week. So I'd swap it off with him just to so he had a program to learn how to use. So I remember those are some of kind of my first memories of the Bard's Tale. I also I was already in business with Activision, as you may remember at the time, with the adventure games, like you just said, and I had started talking to them about Bard's Tale, and I told them it was going to come on 2 floppy disks. And they absolutely were going to have nothing to do with it. That was just an outrageous request.
It's too expensive.
Yeah.
That was a reaction, really. Wow.
Yeah, and at the time, Jim Levy, who was running Activision, was pushing hard on Steve Jobs to put a cartridge port on the back, so that they would give it more support at Activision. So their mentality was, how do we make it a cartridge? And how dare you want to put it on 2 floppy disks?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a new one. Pretty cool.
I know. How times have changed from our little
slightly
140K floppy disks. I think my one sound effect is bigger than the entire game now.
And I guess that having the IP rights also would give you the option to include like the classic trilogy with Bard's Tale 4. I mean, you already did this with the iOS version of the 2005 Bard's Tale, right?
Yeah.
Cool. And just looking at the clock, I don't want to keep you awake that much longer, but to wrap it up, just one Euro specific question. About the translation effort, because, some German players were a little critical about the Wasteland 2 translation, which I believe was like a crowdsourcing event, and people were actually complaining about it being uneven, and parts of the translation were missing. Is this like an area, particularly with the bigger budget you're looking at now, is this an area you're probably going to change the way you handle translations?
You know, we learned a lot since then. In reality, what happened was that you have to remember, a lot of localization houses or translation houses, they actually use computers to make their first pass. They use like a sophisticated Google Translate, and then they have editors go through and do the job of making everything consistent. And so our editor did not come on very late into the process, and so we had a false impression of how good a job it was at the time, and subsequent to that, we had them go through, and I think it's in pretty good shape now. But with that said, we'll absolutely do a better job of translation because A, we'll have the editors on earlier, and number two, we also have a lot less words. I mean, waste on 550,000 words. Those products take a lot longer. Something like Bard's Tale, they're not quite as verbose. It's probably kind of a fraction thereof. But we learned a lot from that, and we will make darn sure the German translation is done well.
So much for our interview with Brian Fargo about the Bard's Tale 4. The Kickstarter campaign for this game is now up and running, so you should definitely check it out if you are interested. Speaking of which, if you are interested in experiencing our podcast in its full German language glory, please visit our website, Spieleveteranen.de. And we also have a Patreon campaign up and running for anybody who's feeling particularly generous. Thank you for being generous with your time, and we hope to hear you again anytime soon at Spieleveteranen-Podcast.